Naz, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I would love for you to start off with an introduction in your own words for people who are meeting you for the first time. Please let everyone know who is Naz Meknat.
I am a immigrant. I am a fashion stylist, celebrity stylist in Los Angeles, and I'm also an author.
I love it. And we're definitely going to jump into your book, 7,000 Miles to Freedom. It is an extraordinary story of a lot of things that you've gone through in your life. This episode, it's a little bit different than what I've recorded before. We are going to be talking about violence against women. So I do want to put a trigger warning out now for anyone who's listening. But your story is a little bit different because it focuses on you escaping from abuse. So I definitely want to jump into that story. But let's start off with childhood. I always ask every guest to talk about what life was like for them growing up.
So I was 4 years old when the revolution happened, and I don't remember life before the revolution much, but I've heard stories from my parents and people who were my siblings who were older than me. And I remember while the revolution was happening, I remember the gunshots and people on the street. I remember one day walking down the street and seeing like bloody handprints on walls, helicopters in the chaos. I remember all that. But I grew up after the revolution, and I grew up in an era that there was no internet, there was no social media. So we didn't really know a lot about how life was before the revolution for my generation and the generations after me. However, as a human, you kind of know that you're not free. There is something wrong here. So we would get resources from outside of Iran in a black market because watching Western movies or listening to Western music was illegal. All this is illegal. So we would get Hollywood movies in a black market. So somebody with a suitcase would show up to your house once a week and you would pick like what movies you wanted to see. You keep it for a week, watch it, and then next week switch. So we got a little glimpse of how life was outside of Iran. And also my oldest sister moved to United States when I was 5 years old, so a year after the revolution. So when she would come back to visit, we would hear and we would see pictures, and little by little I started understanding that we are not living under normal circumstances like, everybody else in the world. So living in a country where you as women especially have no rights, but in general there's no human rights. It's a lot worse for women. I am a rebellious person, and as a child I was very rebellious, so I started fighting back in my own ways however I knew how. So I would wear the latest fashion. It is illegal because we have to wear uniforms. It's a dictatorship. So we have to all, as women, be completely covered from head to toe.
If you didn't, because this is completely new to me, I know nothing about this, so I do have questions, and I'm sure listeners too. If you went against what the rules were, what were the consequences?
The consequences are very harsh. So you would get arrested and you would get thrown in jail. If the crime is a little more serious, you would get whipped with a lash. So the judge would determine how many. You definitely will be arrested. So an example is I was 13 years old and I was just walking down the street and I ran into a boy from my neighborhood. Speaking to an opposite sex that is not related to you is illegal in Iran. So we were both 13 years old, and the morality police, which I explained who they are, spotted us, they arrested us, and they threw both of us, 13-year-olds in jail.
For just having a conversation in the street?
Or talking to an opposite sex
Wow.
that is not related to me. And also, we were exchanging cassettes like Michael Jackson or something new. Again, Western music is illegal. Even the music that was done before the revolution is illegal. So everything had to be to their standard, what they told us to do, what they told us to listen to, how we should look, how to speak, what we need to study. Everything is dictated by this Islamic regime. So a lot of people are a little more familiar these days because of the female-led revolution that is happening in Iran, started in September of 2022, which is because the morality police, which is branching of a policing that was created after the revolution, they patrol the streets and they look for people like my 13-year-old self who are doing something that's not up to their standards. Talking to an opposite sex, if you're not wearing your hijab completely, so if a little bit of your hair is showing as a woman, if you have makeup, let me be clear, this is more than 25 years ago. This is 30 years ago because I moved to United States in 1997. So things might have shifted and changed a little bit. Definitely not for the better. They kind of like loosen up a little bit, but then they really tighten up these standards and rules. So people have no room to breathe. But I'm speaking about my experiences while I was living there, from when I was born till the age of 23 when I escaped my country. Back in the day, if my brother was wearing, we were talking about the 80s, if he was wearing jeans that were a little tight because that was the fashion, or if his hair was a little more spiky and not very simple, if you were trying to be a little different, you would get arrested, you would be thrown in jail. So this is the morality police, which in September, they arrested a 22-year-old girl who was visiting the capital of Iran, Tehran. A little bit of her hair was showing. She didn't have much makeup. She was very, very plain and simple just because a little bit of her hair was showing under her hijab. They arrested her, took her in, and beat her up so badly that she passed away a few days ago in jail. And then they proceeded to tell a lie and say she had heart problems. And then her family comes out and say this is completely false. And the autopsy showed that she passed away from the injuries. So this just gives you a little glimpse of how Iranians have been living for the past 40-something years since the revolution, which was in 1979.
Yeah, I remember reading and hearing about that story that happened in September of 2022, and it went viral, protesting and all these things. And it's just so heartbreaking to have someone like you who has that lived experience, and the fact that it's still going on. Like you said, it might have changed a little bit, but it's still very much present. And especially towards women. I'm sure that living in that environment as you got older, I'm going to assume that it was just that much more difficult for you to deal with. I would love for you to also talk about what life was like for you as an adult before you literally escaped your home country. I know you dealt with an abusive relationship, so I would also love for you to talk about that experience as well.
I wrote a book in 2021. Everything is out, so there's nothing that I don't talk about, because when I decided to write the book, I wanted to be completely honest and transparent. So the reason that I actually did get married at such a young age is because then it goes back again to the government and the dictatorship that we had to deal with. So as an adult, during school years, I was always in trouble. I always called the principals of the middle schools and high schools and Lydia's. For those who watch Handmaid's Tale, they know what I'm talking about. These are the people. First of all, the schools are completely segregated. So girls' school and boys' school. This just shows how much oppressed women are. If you're riding public transportation, men are in the front of a bus, women have to be in the back of the bus. So everything is separated and segregated. And I got in a lot of trouble in school because that rebellious side of me just wanted to fight back. Why? Why are you forcing me to look a certain way? For example, they forced us to study Arabic and Quran. That was mandatory. And I didn't want to. This wasn't something that I was interested in studying. And showing my fight against this dictatorship, first page of every textbook is the picture of the supreme leader, the guy who took over old government, the Shah. So the first page of all textbooks is this picture, which is like a mullah with the turban, all that. And I would, during classes that I hated, which was learning Arabic and Quran, I would draw devil horns and make him look like a devil with red eyes and stuff. And I would get caught and I would get expelled. I would get expelled just because my mom would beg them not to report me. So if I was going to be reported to the authorities, I would have to do jail time. Or I would just let my hair show out of my scarf when I went to school. The uniforms were so ugly for women. These baggy, long kind of coats that we had to wear, no bright colors. It had to be black, gray, navy, dark brown, and covered all the way from head to toe with these baggy pants underneath it. And I was a creative child, and I always liked to express myself with, art. Wearing outfits the way I wanted to was a form of that. And I would wear denim. And back in the day, in the 80s, like, there was a trend that you would draw on your jeans and, all the symbols and things. And I would do that. And the minute the school was out, I would take those baggy pants out. And under that, what we call it, manteau, which is like a long coat, I would just have my skinny, tight jeans underneath. And somebody would see me leaving the school outside, would report me. So going back to the marriage, it is so hard to live in a country that everything is illegal. Everything that a normal person does is illegal. If you dance in a public, you will get arrested. If they find out you're having a party and it's mixed of men and women, you get arrested and go to jail. So dating obviously is a no, 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 no. And I started dating my ex. We grew up together. We were neighbors and we grew up together. His sister was one of my best friends. And we started dating when I was 17 because we kept getting in trouble. And also, my dad was an old-fashioned man and he just didn't really believe in dating. And he also wanted to protect me. I'm the youngest and I'm the one who always got in trouble and always stood up to the government and the morality police. So he wanted to keep me out of trouble. So dating was like a no, both from my family and the government. So after 3 years of just sneaking around and getting caught and getting in trouble, we decided we're going to get married just to have one less issue with this government. Unfortunately, didn't really give it a lot of thought, and we decided we're going to get married. So against both our families' wishes, we went to the court and got married. No wedding, no dress, nothing. Both him and I had to convince my father, because you can't marry without your father's permission as a woman. The man can, the woman can't, no matter how old you are. Your dad has to sign off. So we went to court and I convinced them. I said, we are not going to stop dating. We want to be with each other. So this is the resolution. And right before I signed the papers, my dad one last time and I was the only one left back home in Iran. My whole family were in the United States and my parents were going back and forth because I stayed. He looked at me and he told me, if you really going to do this, don't ever think about coming back. And it was his attempt to one more time try to stop me from making this mistake, but I took it too hard. So after marriage, when my parents also left Iran and came to the United States to be with my siblings, the relationship went sour. We were living with his mom and sister, and they didn't like me. They didn't want him to marry me. So the whole family made my life a living hell. He became an extreme alcoholic. With that became the abuse. First, it was mental, then it became physical to a point that I would wake up black and blue and cut everywhere. I kept it a secret from my family just because as a victim, you blame yourself and there's shame and there's guilt. Why didn't I listen to my parents? Why did I insist on doing this? It's my own doing. A lot of people, when they find out that I got married at the age of 19 in Iran, they're like, oh, it was arranged marriage. And I have to correct them. I'm like, no, it wasn't actually. It was my choice. It was a bad choice. I didn't listen. So with it came a lot of guilt and shame. And I can't tell anyone that I'm going through this. I suffered in silence for a while. Finally, when it got to a point that I knew that I wouldn't be alive for much longer, somehow my sister, who would call me from California once a week to check on me, got it out of me. Eventually, I spilled it out and I told her what was happening.
I just want to pause there for a second because that's a lot to take in as a survivor of domestic violence as well. I just want to hold so much space and grace for you. Thank you so much for sharing that because it's never easy to talk about no matter how long it's been. It's definitely not easy to hear it. And I just want to say thank you for sharing your vulnerability because by you sharing your story, you're giving hope to someone who hasn't reached the point that we have that we're able to openly speak about it. So I just want to say thank you so much for were talking about that. I want to know, what was the moment when you finally realized, I can't do this anymore? I need to leave for good. Take us on that journey and what that was like, and you leaving your country.
So to be completely honest with you, I didn't make that decision. I was ready to die. I was ready to face my destiny and the consequences of me not listening to my family. And my parents really wanted me to finish high school and join my sisters and brother in the United States. And getting married and staying behind, it was just my doing. It was my choice. So I wouldn't really tell anyone because of the guilt and the shame. Till I'm very, very close with one of my sisters. As I mentioned, she would call every week to check on me. And she knew something was wrong. The way I was speaking, the way my voice was shaking, the way I was so scared and crying so hard, just saying, oh, I'm just missing you guys. That's all. She knew something was wrong. So she really, really tried. And she finally got it out of me. It's like, you have to tell me what's going on. So I finally told her. At the time, I wasn't allowed to leave the house. So every time he left and his mother left and his sister wasn't home, I would be locked in. There was no way for me to leave the apartment. And this was a high rise. So there was no way of leaving. So it came to a point that I had to tell my sister all my phone calls were monitored when he was home. That particular day when my sister called, it was just me and his sister. And his sister was only a year or two older than me. So she was in her room, just painting her nails and listening to music. And I could speak to my sister a little more free. So I finally told her, I said, okay, this is what's happening. This has been happening for a while. And I remember like a few nights before that, he had cut my forearm from my elbow all the way to my wrist and pour lemon juice and salt on it to just make the pain a lot worse. And I remember looking at myself that morning in the mirror and I was like maybe 80 pounds and I was like black and blue and cut. And that day when my sister called and she had persisted on me telling her what was happening, I finally told her. And I was begging her not to tell my dad because I was so scared of my dad. And she told me, stick by the phone, give me 10 minutes, I call you right back. She called back within 10, 15 minutes and she said, I spoke to mom and dad and this is what you're going to do. I didn't have much there. She's like, whatever you have, grab it back. And before the mother and him get home, convince the sister somehow to let you out. And I had a key to my parents' apartment in the city as well, which was maybe like 10 minutes away. And go there, lock the door behind you, stay there. We call you, we tell you like what the plan is. And I was like, there's no way she would let me out. It's like, just do whatever you can. Like, okay. So I packed a bag and I went and knocked on her door and I came up with a story. I said, hey, things have been really bad. This would happen every night from like, 2, 3 in the morning for a few hours after he was done drinking and would come to the bedroom. The beating, the rape, the yelling and screaming and crying, they would hear. Their bedrooms were, each were on one side of our room. And nobody would do anything. So I'm like, you hear every night what he's doing to me. I'm just going to my uncle's house for a couple of days. Me not being here, maybe he misses me, things will get better. Somehow I convinced her to let me out. So she unlocked the door and she said, oh my God, he's going to kill me. I'm like, just tell him you were in the shower. And I somehow found the key. So I left. I went to my parents' apartment, locked myself in. All the curtains and shutters were completely off. Lights were off. And I stayed there till they called me. And unfortunately, my parents were here to get their green card, so they couldn't leave. They had to stay for a certain amount of months, for at least 6 months to be eligible and get their green card. And it was right after my sister had gotten married. So I had to stay at my parents' apartment, like hide in my parents' apartment for a few months till my parents could come back.
Did he know where your parents live?
Yeah. So I would get knock on the door and doorbell will ring at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, all times of the day and night, screaming from outside of the street. And I would literally live, even though the apartment wasn't so visible from the street, but I still would like no lights. All the shades were all pulled. The TV was on, but the sound was very, very low. I would not leave. My best friend and two of my uncles knew the situation. My dad had called them and talked to them. So they would every few days come and bring me, groceries and money and food and things that I needed so I wouldn't have to leave. If he saw me outside, he could legally drag me back. Here's the thing. Women under this Islamic regime have no value and no rights. So you do belong to a man. Before you get married, it's your father. If your father is not around, your brother. If your brother isn't around, is your uncle. Once you get married, it is your husband. The decision is made by the man. You belong to the man. You have no rights and no value.
It's like you're a piece of property.
Exactly. You're an object. There's no such a thing as going to authorities, getting a restraining order. That doesn't exist. Or saying, I'm being abused. They will laugh at you, be like, and you need to go back. Unfortunately, there's nowhere to go. There's no organization. Police doesn't care. There's nothing for women in Iran to find safety and protection. So one of my biggest things since I started searching and studying a little more about what's happening with domestic violence victims and survivors here, and I see that with all the resources they have in this country, they still stay, that breaks my heart because I want to tell them, look where I came from. I was having these experiences in a country that I am nobody. I am nothing. I have no rights. But I finally made it out. So for you to have so many resources and organizations, you can go to a police and get a restraining order. Don't get me wrong, the system is broken. It is not perfect. However, you have so many more resources here than I did back home, or women do still. They don't have any resources or help back home.
So what would you say to someone who's here in the States, who's been in situations that me and you have been in, and they're on that cycle of leaving and coming back? We know the statistics, the average times it takes for a victim of domestic violence to permanently leave is 7. What would you say to someone who they know that they want to leave and they've gone through that cycle, but they keep going back and they're scared, they have that shame, that guilt, all the things that we felt? What is something that you would tell that woman right now?
First of all, the guilt and the shame doesn't belong to you. It belongs to your abuser. You have done nothing wrong. You are just a victim, and whatever that's waiting for you outside after this life, after this situation, cannot be worse than what you're experiencing. There is no way you can tell me if I leave, things are going to get so much worse. If you're living in hell, if you're being abused. I mean, we know we do have men victims as well, but we generally speak about women because the number is a lot higher. So a lot of women, they don't leave because of a couple of things. First is the financial dependency. If you're dependent on a man financially, you're always thinking, if I leave, I'm going to starve. I have no home. I'll be homeless. I can't, feed myself. Or if you have children, even worse. As I said, I know the system is broken, but there are organizations out there that can help. There are shelters. And this is temporary. This is not forever. I know that I have a family that supported me. I know I have a sister that was sharp enough to know something was wrong, even though I wasn't saying anything. And once I did, I got help from my family. Not everybody has a family that can support them. I understand that. Maybe you have a friend who will do it. Maybe you have a neighbor who's willing to support you. You don't have a neighbor, you don't have a friend, you don't have a family. Again, you can pick up a phone and call an 1-800 number and tell them. There are signs that if you're outside, you can make the sign with your hand that people know you're in trouble. There's so many ways. So there are more ways for you to leave than the excuses that you come up with. And the financial situation, the dependency, however you think, it's all temporary. There are people out there who are willing to help. All you have to do is ask. That's what I learned. The minute you ask, the minute you come over the shame and the guilt and you understand this is not your fault, and there are good people out there who are willing to help, it might be a complete stranger. The minute you say something, there will be somebody out there to help. And you know what? If there's nobody out there to help, you help yourself. The first step you have to take is the hardest, but for your children's sake, If you don't have children for your own sake, your life is worth way more than that. You have one life. Do you want to live it like this forever? I understand that now at this age, but when I was going through it and I was very young, I wasn't thinking about these things. So I got lucky that my sister forced this out of me and I got help. And I understand that it's really, really hard when you're young to come to that conclusion that I can do it. Yes, I'm going to leave. I'm going to be fine. I get it. I get it. But there is a community out there that's willing to support you. I've seen, heard, read so many of these stories that women are waiting for the right time, waiting for, let me save some money, let my kid get a little older, let him graduate from this grade, just waiting for something till they leave. And unfortunately, they lose their life because then you're one argument, one fight, one drunken night from that man strangling you, pulling a gun, or somehow taking your life or hurting you so bad that you're not the same anymore.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that's one thing that I've realized going through my own journey. Every single time the abuse got worse. And that's something that it's an unfortunate truth that when they say, I'm never going to do it again, they are going to do it again and it's going to get worse. And unfortunately, we've seen it in the news and headlines and social media that it only is talked about or brought to attention when it gets to that point that it's too late. That needs to stop. That's why we need to have these conversations to normalize what you're going through is not normal and it's not okay. And it's okay for you to leave. It's okay for you to take that step. And same for me. No one knew what I was going through. It was a very short relationship. We were only together for 10 months. The abuse started probably 6, 7 months into the relationship. And no one knew because I was shame, guilt, all of those things. And it wasn't until I physically escaped my abusive relationship that night and I went to my best friend's apartment. And that was the first time that I told someone what was happening. And that's when the help started, when I finally spoke up and used my voice to say, I'm not okay. So I really just want to drive that point home to anyone who's listening. Using your voice to speak up can change your life, as scary as it is. But that is how the healing can begin.
Yeah, I mean, people are not mind readers. If you don't say anything and you look fine, and it doesn't have to be a physical abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse, it has lasting effects on you for the rest of your life. If you're going to have children, if you do have children, you're going to transfer all this trauma to them. And one point that I want to bring up is my own parents' relationship wasn't perfect. I grew up watching them fighting. I grew up watching my dad beating my mom. Sometimes I tell my mother, I'm like, I wish she would have left. I wish she would have gotten a divorce. But with their generation, it's like divorce is not even a part of vocabulary.
No,
So
you got to just stick it out and make it work. Yep.
yeah, but I'm like, you thought staying because you had 4 children was the right thing to do, was a brave thing to do. But I'm here to tell you, I got in that abusive relationship and didn't speak to anyone because I thought it was normal. The signs were there. I'm not going to lie. Before I married this man, the signs were there.
Could you share some warning signs of what you would say to a listener right now who they think they might be in this type of relationship, but they're not really sure? What would you say are some warning signs that one should look out for and what you experienced?
It started with jealousy and being possessive. For example, like if I was joking with a friend of ours that was male and laughing at his joke or doing something very, very simple, I would my arm would be grabbed really hard and pulled and be called names. You're a whore, you're like, you want him, you want to, things like that, that I misread these signs as, oh my God, he really loves me. Especially because I've seen my mom and dad, my mom staying. I've witnessed my dad physically abuse my mother, verbally all the time abusing my mother. And as a 16, 17-year-old, you think, oh, well, my dad does that to my mom. So it's love. It's normal. That's a relationship. That's how it is. When you're that young, you don't realize and you don't understand. And the times have changed. I understand that, when I was growing up, especially in my country, as I said, women have no right. Women are property of a man. So you don't really think about these things as very, very strange. Domestic abuse is not talked about because it's your fault as a woman. You've done something that made him angry. But yeah, there were signs. Before we got married, he never beat me, but there were signs of aggression that I sometimes had to take a couple step backs and be like, whoa. However, I ignored them because I thought, oh, he just loves me so much. This being so possessive and feeling like, oh, I belong to him.
And that's something that a lot of us women do. Like, we tend to justify or make excuses or think if, like, maybe if I love him a little bit harder or if I do more things to please him and make him happy, then that'll stop it. And then we end up losing ourselves in the process.
Women make this mistake. I've seen it over and over and over. They think they can fix men. There's nothing to fix.
That was me.
There's nothing to fix. He is who he is. He's showing you who he is. Believe him. He's not a child. You're not his mother. You're his partner. So it's not your job to fix him. And trust me, he won't be fixed. This anger, this aggression comes out one way or another. If he changes from abusing you, how do you know he's not going to abuse your child? It's not your job, and the life is so short for you to try to spend your time to fixing a grown-ass man. So move on and just think about yourself and your life. And I didn't want to fix him. I didn't think he's fixable. And I didn't want to fix him. I'm like, you're just a monster. When my sister gave me that courage to leave, he came after me hard. Like, he did not want to let me go. Even when my parents came back, my dad went and spoke to him, man to man, thinking he's going to sign the papers and divorce me. So again, I don't have any rights in Iran to ask for a divorce. They laugh at you. It has to be the man. My dad asked him nicely. He refused. He threatened him. He refused. My uncles went to talk to him. He refused. So I decided, I'm like, maybe if he hears my voice. It's been a few months. I called him. I asked him nicely. I'm like, I never will come back. Let's just do this. He's like, you know what? You can wait till your hair is the color of your teeth. You will not get a divorce. You belong to me. I was stuck. It was a situation that nobody could do anything unless he wants it. So I had to escape my country overnight. I couldn't say goodbye to my grandmother. I couldn't say goodbye to my best friend. I literally packed a bag and left the next morning, left the country. Because if he could get his hands on me legally, he could drag me back. He could kill me. And that murder would be justified. It wouldn't even be murder. It would be like, well, she disobeyed her husband. And he could have just, with no witness, he could have just said, she cheated on me. And that's a crime that's punishable for women. It might be a little too graphic for some people, but it's the reality. They buried a woman in the ground from head down. So just your head showing. And they stone you to death. I really had nowhere else to go. Nobody was on my side. The government, the law, nobody was on my side but my family. So I had to pack a bag and leave. And for people who read my book, who will read my book, they will know that what I had to go through from the day I left to get here to safety, that's another story.
Yeah. You guys got to get the book to hear that part. Have you been back ever since?
No, I couldn't.
You don't ever see yourself going back?
For years, I couldn't go back because of him, because he hasn't signed the papers. And the minute I put my foot in that country, I would be arrested and sent to him to do with me as he pleased. So I couldn't. Once years later, so this has been 25 years, when he was convinced that I'm on the other side of the world and I've made it here and I'm not going back, and our marriage doesn't really stand here, it doesn't mean anything here, he finally signed the papers. But the way I came to United States was a very, very, very hard journey. They wouldn't give me a visa, even though my whole family was here. I went through a lot. So I got stuck in Istanbul for 6 months. A lot of things happened in Istanbul while I was there. So once I got here, the fear of somehow going back and not being able to leave, because this government has done it so many times. You might be nobody as far as politics goes. They will label you as a spy and they throw you in jail. Nobody will know where you are. Nobody will see you ever again. So that was the fear. And then once I decided to write the book, because I was going to speak about this government and this regime, I knew I could not go back till this regime changes. And I started the process in 2018 or 19. I had to speak with my family. So my dad had passed. My dad passed about 12 years ago. So I knew my dad is buried here. My grandparents are all gone. My whole family is here. I knew there was nothing urgent for me to go back. Obviously, it's my homeland, it's my country, and I'm dying to go back and see my country. But I know till this regime changes, especially after writing the book, there's no way I can go back. I will be arrested right away.
I just want to commend you for speaking out against a whole country, basically, and just sharing your experience. We'll definitely leave the link on where to purchase your book in the show notes so people can get the full in-depth story, because this is just like the tip of the iceberg, y'all. So I would love for you to talk about, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, that this is like a lifelong journey for you. And I'm sure that you deal with triggers and flashbacks. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. It's something that I still, to this day, deal with. I would love for you to share some advice for other survivors of abuse. How do you navigate those moments when those triggers come up, when those flashbacks come up? How do you navigate it in a way that it's not paralyzing to your life and you can't move from that moment?
Don't make the mistake I made. I never seek therapy. Therapy is not something we had back home when I was living there. I'm not sure if it is available now. I'm sure there is. But back then, there was no such thing. It was a psychiatrist, you would go get a pill. So I wasn't familiar with therapy. Coming from such a different culture and environment, it takes a while for you to get used to how things are done elsewhere. I didn't really seek therapy. My coping mechanism was put it in the back of my mind, forget it, move on. So I'm kind of like a tough person mentally. So I just kind of was like, I'm here, it's done, it's over. So I pushed all this back and forgot about a lot of things and tried to not remember and not to think about it. I know it comes out in different ways, the trauma that like I've gone through, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in friendships, it just comes out if you don't deal with it in some other way. However, once I decided to write the book, because I had to revisit everything and put it on the paper, that became my therapy. All of a sudden, I found myself sitting there. Writing the book took 3 years, and it's not a big book. It's a small book. But I had to pause. I had to process. I had to deal with, and I had to think about, oh my God, it was me who went through all this. I'm putting it all on the paper and I'm bawling and I'm crying for this person. And that person is me. So I had to pause a lot, think about things, deal with it, process it. And I started working on myself without going to therapy. I just started doing a lot of practices. I read a lot of self-help books and listened to gurus and tried to meditate and try to do it my way. However, I really, really do suggest taking therapy because that will help a lot.
Yeah, when I first started my whole healing journey, I knew I couldn't do it on my own because sometimes I still am that person who likes to repress and not deal with it or deal with it on my own and think like I'm the strong bitch. I don't need to ask help for nobody. Going through something very traumatic like what me and you experienced, I know I needed outside help. So working with a therapist, working with life coaches, building a community, starting this podcast, like getting the thoughts out and not letting them ruminate in our brain, I think that's a great first step for anyone to start and even to deal with those moments of challenge that come up, because they're always going to come up, especially as survivors of abuse. You're going to have flashbacks. What I would add on to what you said is to acknowledge the moment when it comes up. Don't run away from it, like you said, but also don't stay in that moment for too long, because that's how you can slip into a deep, dark place that you don't want to go to. And I know for myself, if I go down that darkness, it can get really dark really fast. I need to take the responsibility to allow myself to not stay there for too long because it does nothing but hurts me and hinders my growth.
Yeah. You have to drown yourself in something that you love and you enjoy.
What would you say is like the top thing that you've learned about yourself and all the life experiences that you've gone through?
I'm way stronger than I knew. Thinking back about what I've gone through and how I handled myself and who I became as a person after that. And I didn't realize that till somebody mentioned it. One of my friends actually mentioned it after reading my story. And she was like, you don't give yourself enough credit for how you've handled everything and the person you've become. And she's right. I never gave myself credit for any of it. I was just like giving everybody else the credit and not really acknowledging that you are the person who went through all these experiences and came out of it, the person you are now. Nobody would blame you for staying in that hole and that dark place with everything you've experienced and being so jaded and looking at the world in a different way because of what you've gone through. However, you do decide to, okay, it happened. It sucks, but I'm here. Let's make something out of our lives and let's move forward because that person is not worth me wasting my whole life sitting there and dwelling over why did he do this to me? Why did he make me a victim? Why this and why that? It happened. It's gone. It's done. I made a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes. And I just realized I'm like, okay, I need to give myself some credit as well. So I did realize that I'm stronger than I thought.
You are the type of guest that I like to feature on this show. We talk about a lot of heavy, uncomfortable topics, which is your real life experience, but it's only a small chapter of your book of life. You were able to turn something so traumatic into something bigger, and for you to be able to help others by sharing your story, that's exactly why I wanted you on my show, because you didn't allow this situation to have you stay there, and you also took your power back from him. Because if you really think about it, if you're continuing to live in this victim mentality and like, oh, why did he do this to me, like, he still has control and power over you, and you don't want to allow that to continue happening, because then you don't even know who the fuck you are. You know what I mean?
No.
Yeah.
You don't want to be consumed by that. No. You
No.
don't want to be defined by the experience you went through as a victim. You're not a victim anymore. You're a survivor. Once you take that one step and decide, this is not for me, I'm worth more, I'm leaving, then you are a survivor. And there is so much power in that word. There's so much power in being a survivor. Now it's your turn to go seek people who do need your help. One of the reasons I wrote the book is I didn't actually want to write about my story because I'm a little more private, and I'm that kind of person. It's like, it happened. What's the point of me just airing it out and telling everybody and talking about it? However, one of my friends told me, is like, imagine when you were going through the situation, if you got your hands on a book, on a story, on something that you saw somebody that is like you, looks like you, is in the same situation. She made it out and she made a life out of after this abuse and she's thriving. Wouldn't you have said something earlier? Wouldn't you have stood up to him? Wouldn't you have said, I'm done, this is enough? If you read something that resonated with you and you had an example, and I thought about it. And so she actually said, it's not about you. This is so much bigger than you. It's not about you. So you're just thinking about, I want to protect my privacy. I don't want to, I. But by just sharing your story and not being ashamed of what had happened, you can actually help someone who's in the same situation being, you know what? She did it. I'm going to do it too. Especially because where I come from, especially because I wasn't in this country and had no resources. Maybe somebody here in Texas, in Alabama, somewhere in this country, be like, wow, she really didn't have anything and she escaped that country. Yes, it sucked and I went through a lot of shit, but she finally made it. So maybe that girl or guy say, I'm going to do it too after seeing you, reading your story. That convinced me to write the book.
That is so powerful when we take our power back by sharing our truth and being vulnerable and not sugarcoating anything. Like, what you experienced was horrible. What I went through was horrible. What people who are listening to, they're going through right now, it sucks. But know that you are not alone, and know that there is so much more out there for you once you take that step to finally say, I'm not dealing with this shit anymore. I believe in myself more. I love myself more to know that I deserve more. This might be a heavy question, but we talk about heavy shit on this podcast, and I want to hear this from you. If you had the opportunity right now, being the woman that you are today, to say something to your abusive ex-husband, what would you tell him?
If you asked me this question 5 years ago, the answer would be so different. I'll be cussing and I would be like saying things I shouldn't. Right now, today, I would just say, please go get some help. Please get some help, because nobody's born like that. Whatever that had happened to you that made you feeling like you're a big, strong man and your worth and your whatever you think that you are is based on how you treat a woman, that's problematic. So I would say, for your own sake, I'm not even there anymore. And that's like the last conversation I had with him when I was living here. And I wanted to tell him that I'm not there. Go sign this divorce papers. I said, do it for yourself, because I'm here and our marriage is really not valid here. I don't care. I can go marry like 8 times if I want to here. But for your own good, you might meet someone, you might want to get married to someone else. Let this go for yourself. So today I would say, even though he's like an older man now, I would be like, still, it's not too late. Go get some help. You don't want to live the rest of your life being that person. Help yourself. That's all I have to say. Like, I have nothing else to tell him. What's the point? You can curse and you can wish him whatever, but at this point, I feel like him knowing and seeing how my life is now is punished enough for him. It's hard enough for him to see where he is and where I am. How my life turned out and how his life turned out.
Thriving and flourishing and being your best self, not having that hate in your heart anymore. That is like the biggest fuck you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think about you anymore. I feel sad for you that you felt like you had to do that to feel important, because he really couldn't at the time. He couldn't really keep a job. And he was a person who was extremely spoiled by his parents, especially his mom, who encouraged him to be abusive towards me. And it's really sad. I feel like he's a victim as well. So I hope that he has gotten some help. I don't know.
Same for me. If you would have asked me that 2 years ago, because it's been 2 years since I left, it would have been a completely different answer. But for me, he's in prison for what he did, which I'm thankful for. So I hope you heal, because I know that he's the type of person, he's done it before, and I know he will do it again if he doesn't get the rehabilitation that he needs. But I also know that that is no longer my responsibility, and it's not for me to fix when I thought I could fix someone who doesn't even see a problem within themselves.
Yeah, and it's not our job to fix them. As I said earlier, I'm not your mom. It's not my job to fix you. If this is the man that you have become and you're proud of it, I want nothing to do with it. I rather stay single for the rest of my life than being in the situation like that. And there's always a bright side to things. And my eyes are so open that any relationship that I had after that, if I saw a sign that this is going in a wrong direction, I knew I had to leave. I'm not even tolerating the smallest amount of abuse,
Yeah.
whether it's mental, physical, it doesn't matter.
You wouldn't wait for the orange flag to turn red.
No,
Yeah,
no, life is too precious. Yeah.
absolutely. Especially with everything that you've gone through. We don't have time to waste on bullshit, okay? I want to know, since you're on the Watch Us Thrive podcast, tell me your definition of thriving.
My definition of thriving is really going after what I love, living the life that I've always wanted to, and achieving the goals that I've set for myself. I didn't have a lot of opportunities growing up in Iran. As I said, I was always a very creative child, but dancing and singing and makeup and fashion, these are all legal in Iran, especially for women. We don't have women who can sing publicly. So singers are all men. Yeah, you can't hear a woman's voice, no matter how beautiful her voice is. You're a woman, your voice cannot be heard. They want you to be invisible, basically. So I couldn't really pursue all the things that I loved back home. So once I got here, I decided I'm going to go after it. Not right away, because again, I come from such a different culture and country and opposite of the planet. So I had to take a few years to get used to who I am here. Who am I? Like, what do I want to do? And all of a sudden, all this freedom being thrown at you. We don't have the freedom of speech. We don't have the freedom of being who you are. None of this exists. So it took me a while to get used to, who do I want to be? It feels like I'm a newborn, even though I was 23 years old. I didn't go to college till I was 28 because I had to find myself again. Who am I here now? But once I did, even though I started a little late in life, I made it happen. I love to be in entertainment business and fashion and film. And I put myself through college. I wasn't even living in Los Angeles. It was about an hour and a half outside of LA. That's where my whole family is. And even though I had this fear of being away from my family because I was for so long and so many bad things happened when I finally got the courage to say, okay, I'm moving to the city. I'm moving to LA because my life, the things I want to do is there. And speaking of thriving, the minute I made that move, and I was a grown ass woman, but still the trauma keeps you from doing the things that you really want to do. Again, my sisters, I have two sisters, and we were talking about this, and they're like, God damn it, you keep talking about wanting to move to LA, just go. It's an hour away.
Yeah.
It's literally an hour away. You don't like it, you feel like scared or like you want to be closer to us, come back. And that was 10 years ago. I never went back. But yeah, this is thriving. I came to LA, I put myself out there. I really wanted to work with celebrities, and it started happening because I went for it. I went for it and I made the things that I wanted to achieve happen to a point that my friends who were thriving way more than I when I was back home in Iran, now when we talk, they're like, wow, I cannot believe. And I'm not saying, oh, I'm so successful and this and that. In my own standards, comparing to where I came from and the opportunities that I did not have. This is for me thriving, living the life I always wanted to live. And wasting it on someone for a few years set me back. But I eventually made up my mind, better late than never. And I went for it.
All right. So the final question before you plug in how we can follow you. In the far future, when you're no longer on this living earth, someone needs to sit down and write about you. What do you want them to say about Naz?
I would love to be remembered as somebody who never gave up. I would like to be remembered as someone who really tried and did her best to be a better person, to help as much as I can, not let my past define me, and really persisted on creating a good life for myself. The definition of a good life for everybody is different. Some people feel like having a mansion, they've made it, it's a good life. Some people being successful in their job. Some people would love to get married and have children. So it's different for everybody. For me, we don't take enough credit. We as women just don't give ourselves enough credit. And I feel like we try to be humble and we try to be down to earth a little too much. When my sister is married to an American man, and he, again, for people who's going to read the book or have read the book, they know he is my hero. If it wasn't for him, I don't know if I will be here. And he sometimes tells me, I talk about him a lot in the book, but he sometimes tells me how proud he is. He's like, I'm so proud of you. Look what you've done with your life. And I don't know how to take that. I'm like, what? Why? I haven't done anything special. But people see you from outside. Knowing your history, they see you differently than you see yourself. So we need to give ourselves a little more credit. But what I really want people to remember is that I really try to make a decent life for myself and I didn't let my trauma to define me, I tried to become better and help in any way that I could. Nothing really matters. You need to be kind. You don't know what people deal with. Because what I do, it's really like fancy looking at it from outside. Being a celebrity stylist, being in Hollywood, going to all these functions. Sometimes people look at your life from outside and they envy your life and they think you have no problems. I just want to say that, especially because of social media. I have young nieces and nephews. It's not all flowers and rainbows and fun, and everybody's dealing with something. And it's really important, especially on social media, to be transparent. Before my book came out, obviously it was all my work and fun and parties and this and that. And I started writing my book during pandemic, like right when pandemic started. And I started becoming a little more open about my trauma and about what I deal with, because I don't want people, especially young girls, to look at my social media and be like, envious, thinking my life is so great, because I've heard people say that. I've heard people from all over reaching out and thinking this is such. I'm like, we all have things that we have to deal with. I have a past. I still deal with it. I have my problems. So I really hope people understand, and when I'm gone, they would look back and think that I was actually transparent, open, and honest, and try to help in any way I could.
I mean, I couldn't think of a better way to end this conversation. I know people are going to be so inspired by you and your story and want to know more about you. They want to read your book. So please plug in how we can follow you, how we can buy your book, anything else that you're working on that you'd love to share with my listeners today.
The book can be purchased on Amazon. That's the easiest way, fastest way to get it. So it's called 7,000 Miles to Freedom. You can follow me on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. I'm not a TikToker. And my handle is Naz, N-A-Z _Meknat, M-E-K-N-A-T. Most of what I do, most of what's happening with me, everything, I just update everybody on Instagram. My website is mostly for my work. It's my first name, last name, nazmeknat.com. So it's just like my portfolio and fashion work that I do. But I speak more about social issues, what's happening in Iran, what we are doing as advocates and activists, whether it's the domestic violence, whether it is women's rights, any social issue that I'm passionate about, plus my work in fashion and fun things, everything, I share it on Instagram.
I love that so much. Any plans to write another book?
I never say never. A lot of people want to know what happened after, because I end my book like when I come to United States. So because it's about my journey of living in Iran and how I got here. So a lot of people ask, so how did you get here in this business and this, like, how did all this started happening? If there's a lot of interest, I might write another book to be continued and like talk about how I got here. Obviously, I had a couple more relationships after that, didn't work out for different reasons. There's definitely more to talk about. My experiences in the entertainment industry, dealing with celebrities and the Me Too movement that happened. That was actually one of the reasons also that I wrote the book, because I've experienced that myself being in this industry. So there's a lot to talk about. So yeah, I might.
I would be so excited to see a part 2, and I'm just so excited to watch your journey. And again, I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing your truth. Like I said before, this is just like the tip of the iceberg, y'all. So if you want the full story, definitely go get her book, 7,000 Miles to Freedom. It's available everywhere that you can purchase a book. Once again, I just want to say thank you so much. This conversation has been so powerful, so healing. And I know that the work that you're doing, and just by sharing your truth and your vulnerability and authenticity, you're helping so many people out there to find their voice and their power. So I just want to give you your flowers and give you the recognition that you tend to not give yourself. We tend to not look at ourselves as much as we should, but I really just want to thank you so much for the work that you're doing, because it's changing lives one day at a time.
Thank you. I appreciate you giving the space to talk about it.
Absolutely.